Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending our session. This is Enhancing E-Resource Management, Leveraging Bibliographic Rank for Quality and Workflow Optimization. My name is Erin Calhoun, and I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at the University of Toronto, and I'm joined by Ali and Yoon. Both are students at the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto and are library students working in the E-Resources unit. So without further ado, let's get started. This is a brief agenda of what we'll talk about today. So we'll do an introduction to the University of Toronto and e-resource management, so how we handle our e-resources and how the bibliographic rank ties into this. We'll discuss the analyzing of the bibliographic rank in our collection. So our first attempt, lessons learned, how we scoped our data, and our findings. And then lastly, we'll discuss how we're implementing change with this information, identifying issues in our holdings, and future considerations. The University of Toronto is a large public university in Canada, and we host over 99,000 students across 3 campuses in the Toronto area. Our library is organized in a central library system where we have 40 libraries distributed among the central system, along with those in federated colleges and campuses. Our library system is Canada's largest, and we're often ranked among the top research libraries in North America. Our library collection holds more than 2 million e-resources in various formats. So we have streaming media, we have books, we have journals, we have databases. E-resources are all managed through our central collection development department that oversees the licensing and loading of e-resource records. Our e-resource management team is small but mighty. Up until 2025, we were made up of 1 e-resources librarian, 1 metadata staff member, and relied heavily on 1 to 2 graduate students from the Faculty of Information, Ali and Yoon here, to assist with managing the majority of our essential work, such as loading and maintaining e-resource records in our LSP. In January 2021, the library migrated our library services platform to Alma, and this was a huge change in the way that we handled our resources and was a major win in terms of how would we be able to support e-resource access. Alma allows for a closer alignment between e-resource management system capabilities, resource discovery, and acquisitions information. Prior to Alma, we were using Intoda as our e-resource knowledge base, and for items that were not in Intoda, we used a locally hosted e-resource knowledge base called EIR. When migrating our electronic resource records to Alma from Intoda, a decision was made at the point of migration that we would favor community zone records from Alma's knowledge base as much as possible and introduce variation in how these resources might be augmented based on the data that was provided. I want to give huge credits to this work to our former metadata librarian, Jordan Peterson, for a lot of the essential work that she did in these decision-making and loading of records. So first, if the resource is available in the community zone and there's no obvious issues, we move ahead with activating as normal. If the community zone records have title level records, but have poor metadata quality, we'll still prefer to go ahead and activate the collection and portfolios and turn on CDI, but we'll also report the quality issue to Ex Libris for resolution or investigation. Our reasons for choosing to locally load records are very specific. There has to be no community zone option available, and we would have had to wait a long time for Ex Libris to add content with no results. We'll load local records, but we'll still wait for the community zone records to eventually be added and then use those to replace those local records. Or in cases where the vendor's records are superior to the community zone records for whatever reason, we'll load those into a collection linked to the community zone so that we still get the benefit of the community zone level collection and service. In most cases, we want to use the community zone when it's available. Our main priority is to establish consistency in our workflows, provide flexibility to augment records when needed, and streamline our workflows to free up staff labor. Allowing for local and community zone records to harmonize in our holdings also makes it easier for us to identify those local portfolios amongst the community zone and activate when or if their metadata quality has improved. This is a high-level summary of the number of collections we have activated in our collection. As you can see, the collections with portfolios, that is the aggregator and selective packages, we have a huge bias for community zone linked. And that's not to say that every single portfolio in those community zone linked collections are community zone linked also. We do have local portfolios in there for whatever reason. But for our databases, we're way more likely to have a local record due to either community zone availability or high numbers of duplication between our resources due to the migration resulting in those duplicated database records. So how does the bibliographic rank tie into this? In 2023, Ex Libris announced that a score would be assigned to bibliographic records that evaluates the completeness and richness of MARC records in Alma. This score, the bibliographic rank, would be based on information like identifiers, names, subjects, leader and 008 fields, and publication details, among other features. And one of the purposes of this score is to assist libraries with determining if records need a little extra attention at the time of activation. When searching for a title in the community zone, we can clearly identify the bibliographic rank score, and this is the average score of all portfolios in that collection. And this can also be viewed in the metadata editor, which we will show you later on. As mentioned, the bibliographic rank for a record is calculated in Alma by an algorithm. And the rules for that algorithm are all listed in the Ex Libris documentation, which is listed on the slide here, and we'll go over. The algorithm assigns a score in two parts. The first score is breadth. Each field in a record is assigned a category, and those categories are then assigned a point value of low, medium, or high. For example, title is a very important category, so if a record has a 245 field, it gets 7 points added to the score. If that record has a canceled identifier, it'll only get 1 additional point per field in that category because Ex Libris considers this a low importance category. The second possible score is depth. This score checks not just if the category is included, but how many fields in that category are included. Subjects are a clear example of how this might work. So subjects has a depth limit of 15, meaning that the score will only be applied to up to 15 recorded subjects. A record could have more than 15 subjects, but Ex Libris wants to avoid giving too much weight to a record that might list 30 subjects. You could theoretically go through a MARC record according to their algorithm and score doing the math yourself, but this would be overkill given the number of e-resource records that any library may have. So while our assessment is focused on bibliographic rank score, we also need to acknowledge the presence of a brief level. This is a score from 1 to 10 that measures the completeness of a bibliographic record, 1 being the most brief to 10 being the fullest. The brief level can be used to evaluate each record for the presence of certain fields. For example, the library should never want to load a record that doesn't have a title field. When migrating to Alma, our metadata team had a chance to define what constitutes a 1 in our brief level ranking, and I won't dive into the specifics as we're not the metadata experts in the library, and also because this is supposed to capture both print and electronic records, which is a bit outside of the scope of what we're looking at. But at the time of implementation, our metadata team was highly influenced by Harvard's criteria for sufficient elements for reporting records to OCLC, which is based on the brief level. Harvard's description of brief levels, while it's institutionally specific, influences how we develop the brief level in our templates. This includes essential information such as title, date, place of publication, language, and type of resource. Following Ex Libris's announcement of the availability of the BibRank in early 2023, our e-resources team came together to review the documentation and each section together. We had librarians with metadata expertise, myself with the e-resource management perspective, and our students who had conveniently finished an original e-resources cataloging course. We compared the algorithm's documentation against our own quality assurance practice for receiving and loading local records, and we had 3 main takeaways where the algorithm didn't necessarily align with our expectations. The first being uniform entry. This is rated as low importance in Ex Libris's configuration, but our colleagues in metadata think this should be at least a medium. So for example, we'd want a way to bring together the movie edition of Pride and Prejudice, the ebook, and any other medium that the work could exist in. Subjects, these are considered high importance in the algorithm, but we think this could disadvantage e-resources as we know subject information is often missing from our records or in varying quality. So there's no validation that these subjects are also accurate on the record, but their existence could still give the record a very high rating. The last nitpicky thing we have is that Ex Libris indicates the 007CR field to identify e-resources that can be accessed remotely as a medium importance. All of our e-resources are remotely accessible at the University of Toronto, so we considered this scoring to be a bit null, and we haven't had the ability to verify the availability or accuracy of that code in our records. And so when we spot checked some of those records in Alma, we found that we were relying on records with not a very high score. And our priority as a unit is to provide access to e-resources. So if we were to flip these poor records to local, we might put a strain on our workflow. We came away from that group meeting with the understanding that the bib rank is a helpful tool we can use when evaluating records, but it shouldn't be our final judgment call. And with this new information available to us, we wanted to better understand the overall quality of our e-resource records. We wanted to investigate the assumption that e-resource records were bad quality because they weren't created in-house. With our two e-resource metadata students, we formed a project outline to do an environmental scan of our collections and that scope. I started by creating an analytics report from Alma of all of our e-resource collections, and I included the subject area electronic collection bibliographic rank to calculate that score. This was my first mistake because it is not calculating the rank of the electronic collection, but it's calculating the electronic collection's bibliographic rank. So it's not counting the average of the portfolios, just the container. So we went back and fixed that and used the bibliographic rank subject area instead. When spot checking that, we still found there was a difference between what was in Alma and what was in our report. The spot check happened directly after the report was created, so it wasn't a matter of record improvements. And when I sent a ticket to Ex Libris to learn about why this was happening, I didn't get much clarity. That threw a major roadblock and prevented us from moving ahead with this work until many months later. So I'm going to pass it off to Allie to discuss our project outline and goals as they moved ahead.
Thanks, Erin. So building off these lessons learned from our initial assessment of bibliographic rank, we move forward with the overall goal of understanding how Ex Libris assesses the quality of e-resource records and what the state of our records actually is. So e-resource metadata records, as Erin pointed out, are generally thought to be of poor quality when compared to records we have for print materials, largely due to our prioritization of providing access to a high quantity of resources within our catalog, rather than assessing the quality of records during activation. This is also related to the fact that we rely on community zone linked records, and for the most part, we're not doing original cataloging for these e-resources. And so for most of these cases, we are just relying on those community zone records. The general approach to our project involved 3 stages. So first, we started by creating Alma analytics reports that allowed us to classify e-resource collections and portfolios by their bibliographic rank, with a consideration of how they relate to brief levels. So based on Alma's bibliographic rank algorithms, we sorted records into buckets of low, medium, and high, providing a total number of collections in each category based on that bib rank. Next, we assessed the data to consider patterns across providers, interfaces, and material types. And then building on this, we sought to understand the extent of low-scoring collections and portfolios to consider why they are actually scoring low and determine whether we should be seeking alternative metadata options or new approaches to tracking our entitlements. And so the overall scope of our analysis is divided between selective and aggregator packages, which are collections that contain portfolios, and databases, which only have a collection level record. And so we had to generate separate reports for these to collect our bibliographic rank scores. And so we had to create one for the packages and another for databases. For both types of reports, we wanted to capture information about the electronic collections, including the ID, interface, public name, and whether it's linked to the CZ, so that we can include that in our analysis. For the selective and aggregator packages, we had to collect bibliographic rank and brief level subject areas. And as Erin pointed out, for databases, we also had to use the e-collection bib, bibliographic rank, e-collection bib, and brief level subject areas to get into that specific bibliographic rank. And so in these reports, bibliographic rank is given for the packages at the portfolio level. And in Alma, you can also view a collection level average that is displayed in the community zone collections, as Erin showed earlier. And this also includes a breakdown of the percentage of portfolios within that collection that are scoring high, medium, and low. And so our analysis was split between the portfolios and databases to address the different report formats and subject areas, to allow for more in-depth consideration of collection averages and variance in record quality across portfolios, to consider differences that exist between community zone and local records, and to assess the scope of portfolio and CDI records impacted by low bib rank scores. And so our data for this project came from Alma Analytics using the e-inventory subject area, as Erin mentioned earlier. And so we ended up creating 4 reports, 2 for databases and 2 for packages. 2 reports were created so that one would contain the bibliographic rank and brief level data, and the other includes a look at the CDI content. Putting them in a single report just made the data unnecessarily large and messy, and so this allowed us to approach the bib rank and brief level analysis at the portfolio level a little bit more directly while still having information to do further analysis. And so the reports are available through shared folders in Alma Analytics. The directions are on this slide here if anyone wants to look at the structure more closely or create similar reports for their collections. This is the general structure of the report that we can see on the slide here, which I'll walk through in more detail while summarizing our findings and the approach we took to managing the data. But it consists generally of information about the collection, the brief level and bib rank scores, and then the number of portfolios. And so moving on to our next part, we just wanted to point out that in addition, it's also possible to use the advanced search tool in Alma to search for collections or portfolios in the institution or community zone by their bibliographic rank. And as Erin mentioned earlier, the bibliographic rank is also displayed in the record view and in the metadata editor alongside brief level. We can see in the lower screenshot here that it appears as a number next to an icon of a ribbon, and when you hover over it, it lets you know that that's the bibliographic rank. And so that's a way that you can also find when you're in Alma that value for your collection or portfolio you're looking at. So now I'm going to go through the results of our analysis of bibliographic rank, specifically for selective and aggregator collections, and then Yoon will walk us through the analysis of databases. So the first step with this project was cleaning up the raw reports to allow for the creation of interface and collection level summaries. And I want to take a moment to explain how the reports are formatted in a little more detail. So the Excel report is organized into columns, as we can see here, with the electronic collection ID, interface name, and a public name for the collection, along with whether or not it is linked to the community zone. And then for each collection, the number of portfolios for each bibliographic rank and brief level is provided. So because our report looks at both bib rank and brief level, for each collection, there is a row for each combination that is present, and this results in a frequency table. So in this example here, you can see that each row is referring to the same electronic collection, meaning that the total number of portfolios in the collection is actually the sum of the portfolios in that rightmost column. And these are actually the number of portfolios that occur at each combination of a brief level and bib rank score that exists. So for example, the first 2 rows of data have the same brief level, and it shows that 3 portfolios have a bib rank of 42 and 1 has a rank of 31. This provides a clear breakdown, but it makes it hard to quickly assess the overall quality of a collection because those initial reports have a lot of rows. And for a single collection, there can sometimes be dozens of rows depending on how that breakdown of scores works. So we wanted to create a collection level summary of averages and also classify those bibliographic rank scores as high, medium, and low so that we can get a very high level look at these summaries at both the collection and interface level. And to the next slide. And so to create our collection level summary, we used formulas to create a column in a new tab that sums the total number of portfolios in each collection, as well as the number of portfolios that have high, medium, and low scores based off how Ex Libris denotes those differences. And so the average bib rank for the collection was calculated by multiplying that bib rank value by its frequency, and then summing the total and dividing it by the total number of portfolios in that collection. This makes the data much easier to review because each collection is summarized in a single row, which means that at a glance, you can get a sense of whether it's performing high or low, and then also a sense of where those individual portfolios are falling. The examples here are anonymized but represent real collections that we have within our entitlements and spanning a range of total portfolios and bib rank averages. So now I'll discuss a bit how we considered the distribution of bib ranks through standard deviation a bit later. And now we'll move on to looking at how we summarized interfaces. And so to consider the BibRank across these different interfaces, we then created a summary in a very similar process, but now totaling those number of portfolios in collections by the interfaces that they exist within. And so we can see here, there's one column that shows the number of collections that have that given interface, and then the average across all of that, as well as the total number of portfolios and their breakdown as high, medium, and low. Again, this allows for a quick assessment of low scoring interfaces worth investigating and a simple sense of where those portfolios are actually landing within the rankings. So if, for example, interface E here has a single collection with a high number of portfolios, but they all score low, whereas interface B has very high average bib rank, but still has some low performing portfolios that may be worth investigating to understand what it is about those records that has them showing low. And so as mentioned, we are also considered the standard deviation of bibliographic rank scores. And we did this because we wanted to understand how spread out in general the bibliographic rank scores for portfolios are within the different collections. Because the data was provided in a frequency table, the calculation became a bit complicated. So I won't go into it too much, but I think understanding the standard deviation is valuable because it helps us get a sense of whether certain collections or interfaces are consistently good, consistently bad, or whether there's a wide range of BibRank scores. This is also useful for identifying collections for further analysis and for considering what actually differentiates those high and low BibRank scores within the actual records in further investigation. And so most of our collections shown in the summary on the right have fairly low standard deviations, meaning many scores fall within 10 points of the mean score for those collections. But using this, we can quickly identify collections that seem to have a particularly wide spread of data and identify why there's such a variance within the scores of that collection. And so this is the final scoping summary of bibliographic rank scores across our collections, portfolios, and interfaces. And I have a few things to note here. As we can see in general, most of our collections have a very high average score, which was not what we originally expected to see with bibliographic rank, because sort of anecdotally, e-resource collections are understood to not have great records. Most portfolios actually fall within the medium score, which also suggests that there are collections that have a lot of portfolios might have more low scores, or some of the collections that have just in general a lot of portfolios are actually scoring lower. The overall scope of low scoring bibliographic rank is 167 collections, 688,400 portfolios, and 22 interfaces. And so the overall scope, as I mentioned, was lower than we actually might have expected based on a general sense of how e-resource collections are. And especially in comparison to print records, these e-resource records are considered to be quite brief and not have the same depth that would be valuable there. And so low scores suggest that these particularly limited records that warrant further assessment to determine potential steps to improve their quality. But this also suggests that BibRank is best utilized to compare e-resources to each other and maybe not for their overall performance as a record. Additionally, a summary of brief level at the portfolio level reveals that there's not a strict correlation between bibliographic rank and brief level. A high bib rank can appear with a low brief level and vice versa. And this further asserts that considering bibliographic rank alone does not necessarily provide a full picture of e-resource record quality. And some of those changes that can be made to brief level for customization might actually prove more useful in determining what your institution actually wants to assess. So I will now pass it over to Yoon to discuss the analysis of databases.
Hey, thank you, Ali. So what I looked at here are the databases. Now, as Ali mentioned, databases are a set of records we reviewed separately from the aggregate and selected packages because in most cases, they do not have portfolios in them. Or in the cases that these databases contain portfolios, Alma does not treat them the same way as the selective or aggregate packages. And this in turn means that we didn't have to look at the calculations of averages, distributions, and standard deviations. So the preliminary look of the databases is, as you look at the table here, I should note here that the total number of databases I worked with grew a little bit since Erin generated the initial report. Our records, the number of records we have are constantly changing, and the total number came to 1,785. And I counted the number of databases at each bibliographic rank, and I also wanted to see the correlation between the bibliographic rank and brief level. So I also counted how many fell under each level between 1 and 10. So really briefly, about 25% of the records had high or medium bib rank score, respectively, and the other half had a low bib rank score. And a small number, 22 in total, had no bib rank score. And most of the records had either bib rank level 1 or 2, and almost all of the records that had highest brief level score seemed to fall under the same category, which is high bib rank score. But upon closer look, we found that this result had a fundamental problem. Our library is often in practice of creating local records, as Erin explained, when we found our local records can be superior to the CZ records for some reason. So local records created thus are not linked to the community zone, and the interface for provider is not marked. It is shown as none. And sometimes they are given no record, but oftentimes they still get a bib rank score. The number of these local records were too great to ignore, so we try to have another look at the databases. Another problem we had was with the brief level. I'll get into this a little more deeply later, but to explain briefly, as we worked with the numbers, we noticed that the numbers were extremely polarized, meaning that they either ended up being 1 or 2 or 10. And it is pretty clear in the table here already. So we decided to have a look at this in a slightly different way. So here's a breakdown of the databases based on whether they are linked to the community zone or whether they are locally created. It was almost evenly separated between 892 records linked to the community zone and 893 that were locally created. These can be further divided into 724 original records under the CZ linked records and 168 records that were duplicated in the local records. Among the locally created records, there were 650 original records and 243 duplicates. The number of duplicated and duplicates are a little bit different because sometimes we would combine 2 or 3 series or releases of different phases into one or vice versa. And seeing that the records from the community zone and our institutions are almost exactly half and half was helpful, but we still did not see a satisfactory answer as to whether these are providers, whether there are providers or interfaces that seem to consistently score low or high. So this time we try to look at the databases by interface. So among the total of 1,785 databases, 999 were under 233 interfaces were providers, and 786 collections were without an interface or a provider. Those 999 databases could be further divided into two groups. The first one was those provided by 2 large providers, and these are our outliers. So we have about 50% of the databases provided by 2 interfaces, and then we have the rest of the databases provided by 231 interfaces, mostly providing single-digit number databases, some of them into a couple dozen resources. And then we found that the vast majority of the resources from here fall into low BibRank category. And as you can see at the table below, the two large providers, have most of those resources scoring in low BibRank score. And by comparison, our locally created databases, out of the 786, the vast majority of them were scoring either high or medium. 21 had no score given to them. So here's a closer look at the local records divided between the duplicate records and non-duplicate records. The tables here show the number of records in each bibliographic rank category, further broken down into brief levels. I'm sorry, I just noticed there was a blank column between 7 and 8 in the upper table, but you can ignore that. Interestingly, although most records have either high or medium BibRank score, they mostly bear brief level score of 1 or 2. And we spot checked a few collection names among duplicate records to compare the BibRank score and brief level between the Looker and CZ records. And it was often the case that the Looker record had fuller bibliographic descriptions and higher BibRank score, but low brief level, as opposed to the CZ record with low BibRank score, but given no brief level to refer to, or sometimes a high brief level. So as you can see here, I tried to provide a screenshot of a sample where we have duplicates in both CZ originating record and our originally created records. This is the entirety of a database with the CZ provided database. And if you look at the right side, the BibRank is at 32, which is under low category and is given no brief level. Most of the low ranking brief levels, BibRank scores are between 30 and 35, and most of them fill these same fields. In comparison, if we look at the same database that was created locally, this is only a portion of the record here. It was spilling over three slides, so I had to cut it here. And our bibliographic rank was 66. The score is medium, but it was very full. And interestingly enough, the brief level score for this one was only 1. Now, this is an interesting finding, I thought, because intuitively we would think the fuller the record, the higher the brief level would be, but that was not exactly the case here. Okay. So with these findings, what do we do with these findings? Going back to our question of how reliable or consistent is the bibliographic rank across the records to be used as a decision-making tool. We actually found it's a bit difficult to answer than we expected because of several reasons here. First of all, there were 2 big outliers, which actually consisted of half our numbers. And we were not sure if it is because these were the biggest providers indeed, or we just relied on these, we as an institution relied on these 2 more than all other providers. And the sample sizes provided by other smaller providers were actually too small to make a meaningful comparison. Another reason was that the data we have may be further skewed because some of the local records are in fact empty records that need to be cleaned up. Sometimes we would create a local record and wait for the CZ record to be loaded, and because of the time lapse, we would often forget to clean up. So that's a reminder that we have some homework to do. There was also another category in the raw data, which was CDI searchability. Most of the databases, however, had no CDI searchability or it was left blank, so it was not considered in this analysis, and it is our further homework to think how we can utilize this function to get a more meaningful result. Another one, which I keep mentioning, is there was no significant correlation found between bibliographic rank score and brief level. And we want to find a more meaningful way to link between those two. And one great advantage we found was that comparisons of CZ records and local records was really useful for housekeeping. Now I'm going to have Erin to bring us home and wrap it up.
Thanks, Yoon. So building on what Yoon's discussed, we want to consider how this new information can be operationalized to improve our e-resource access through the catalog. Yoon mentioned already, but we do have some homework to do. There's a lot of feature assessment that we can build off of with this data set. There's also opportunities for advocacy and strategy around shared community zone records. So two areas that we would have liked to include in our assessment and that we can take away for future work is an assessment of the depth of the different bibliographic rank groups. So in analytics, we can identify the number of active portfolios in each collection that we have, and it might help us better understand the quality of our e-resource records overall if we're able to identify the volume of portfolios organized in each category of low, medium, and high, separated from their collection. Of course, we know some portfolios in a collection might rank high and some could rank low, and then that bib score would be medium. We started to understand this, as Ellie mentioned, with our standard deviation, but knowing how this variation exists in the catalog outside of those collections would be interesting. Our users don't think in terms of collections like we do, so being able to break those barriers might be interesting and bring new results. The same is true for CDI records. In analytics, we can pull the number of CDI records that are available, but we won't actually be able to identify the bib rank for CDI records since they don't exist in Alma. So by knowing the volume of CDI records at each bib level rank stemming from that portfolio or database that they originate from, it's an interesting insight that into our collection that could potentially help inform our decisions about turning the CDI on or off for collections, which is still a question that we're trying to define and grapple with. But with this new knowledge of our collection and its overall quality, we can make data-driven decisions regarding ways to improve access to and discovery of our e-resources. We're now able to identify the collections and vendors with low-ranking metadata and are able to easily update this going into the future. But how can we leverage our findings to improve the community zone records for all libraries that hook onto these? The bib rank is a helpful identifier to pick those vendors or collections where we know quality might be weak, and we can begin to look closely at the record's description to make suggestions or corrections for the vendor. We're recalling our original e-resource management plan. We would also follow up with Ex Libris or the vendor about those issues with our recommendations for corrections and offering to help in lots of cases. We've already begun some of this work with one vendor where we purchase digitized primary sources from, where we're offering to help identify these frequently occurring issues and what we'd like to see going into the future for community zone records. It's still very important for us to value community zone collections where possible, and deciding to go local over community zone one in cases of low metadata quality and a low bib rank score is still a very strategic decision that needs to take into consideration factors like capacity, how often that collection might change, is it static or dynamic, and our ability to monitor the improvement in e-resource records over time. Also, we know that the bib rank has its flaws, and that doesn't perfectly match up with our preferences. But even with the high-level data about what is poor, medium, or low quality, we still need to understand why a record was given that score. So touching on Yoon's instinct to better understand the relationship between the brief level and the bib rank and the meaning from that. So we need to understand how they were assigned the score and why, and what potential issues or implications that a record may introduce to our catalog. And how this might change our future e-resource management workflow going into the future. So with that, that brings us to the end. We thank you for your attention. If there's questions, you can contact me at the email address here, and I will share with Yoon and Ali. And at that, we thank you.